gavel.
Did I like that? Did I
You're
not?
so funny.
I know, I can't help it. So, good evening. Welcome to the Neighborhood Advisory Committee meeting, November the 27th, 2023, 6 to 7:30, and it's in person at the first floor of the North Conference Room, City Hall. You can stream live on the city YouTube channel, which is www.youtube.com, user for City of Asheville, or you can do public comment via voicemail, 855-925-2801, and our meeting code is 9247, or you can email the Neighborhood Advisory Committee at publicinput.com. My name is Bobette Mays, and I am the chair, and I represent 28803 and 28704, and I will let the other members here identify themselves. We'll start with Joe.
Hi, I'm Joe Taylor, and I represent zip code 28804.
Hello, I'm Elise Martyr. I'm an at-large representative.
I'm Elizabeth Likas. I'm an at-large member, reside in 28803.
Jake Smith, at-large member residing in 28801.
Dane Berger, at-large member, and I live downtown.
And we have Ms. Kim Roney, who is our city council liaison. She is here. And we have Dot Whitehead, she's here. And we have Meredith, she's here. So I hope everyone had a nice Thanksgiving. I ate too much, too many days of turkey food, but it was good. It was good. My son cooked. They fixed food, and I sat there and enjoyed that. Has everyone had time to to look over the approval of the draft minutes from October 23rd? Do you see any corrections? So what I want to do is to go on and let you review the agenda for today's meeting and get a motion. And a second.
I
Are there any
seconded.
Okay, he seconded down here real quiet, like he didn't want you to hear him. Yeah, it was up, so you didn't hear him. But that was Dane.
It was thirded.
Yeah, it was thirded, so we're really in good shape. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And there are no opposed? Do we have any public comments?
We did not.
Oh, next, we'll have staff activities and updates from Dower.
Good afternoon, or evening now. It's definitely dark outside. It's good to see everybody. Dowa Hitch, and I serve as the Communication and Public Engagement Director for the city and the staff liaison for this committee. So we had a few updates today, and I thought, just given the content of the updates, it would be easier to go ahead and give a presentation. Do feel free, as I work through these updates, if you have any information that you'd like to share, to just jump right in. We can take this very informally. And the meat of this is going to be around the committee's annual report, which is coming due in January. So I've got some slides to roll through the different sections of the annual report. I've put some, just based on previous meetings and conversations that the committee's had, I've put a few bullets under each, but definitely want to make sure that they reflect what you all would like to see in your annual report. And to give a little bit of background on how we'll proceed with this. So we've got our meeting tonight. There is not a meeting in December. We'll capture all the comments, feedback that you all give tonight, and then before your January meeting, we will send a draft to the committee. And then in the January meeting on the 22nd, I believe it is, that's where you all will vote to approve the annual report as it is and or add any additions, and then we'll turn that into the city clerk's office the next day. Our meeting date falls right after the reports are due. They're due on that Friday, and then we meet on Monday. So I've got clearance for that, and that will give you guys a good little bit of time to just think through if there's anything that you really want to make sure we capture, and you won't have to do that on the fly. So reflecting back on the 2023 goals and accomplishments. The goals that you all had adopted are there in that rust color. The first one being to promote and celebrate neighborhoods through a Neighborhood Festival. And it was a great festival. I thought you all did an amazing job. It was a really fun event, and we were excited in this first, the first iteration of this kind of the Festival of Neighborhoods, that we had an estimated 400 people show up over the course of the day. It's pretty impressive. It was a really big field, and so I know at times maybe it didn't feel like that, but just based on, I think, the scavenger hunt portion of the day, we were able to keep up with how many people came through. So certainly wanted to capture that so that you all can share that with City Council through the annual report. I can pause there and take any feedback that you all might have that you'd like to see added to that. If anything inspires you, we're happy to get that in there.
Dawa, we had a total of 28, I think, vendors. So the 10 neighborhood organizations and 12 city departments didn't include a lot of the other vendors and nonprofits. Definitely want to reflect that.
We definitely want to reflect that. That's why we're doing this today. That's great. So yes, we will get that in the report. We'll capture that through the recording and make sure that we make that update. Thank you so much for that, Elizabeth. All right, well, if there isn't anything else top of mind right now, we'll move into the second goal, and that was to strengthen neighborhood organizational development. And I know, having worked with the working group that put together the festival, that there was real intention behind creating opportunities for neighborhoods to talk with each other, especially those that are more established, working with those that are newer neighborhood associations. So what we have here in draft form for you all also reflects the feedback that we heard after the event and during it. And that was that a number of neighborhoods mentioned specifically through conversation that they'd really found inspiration through some of the booths of the others, and that they plan on maintaining those connections. So we definitely wanted to capture that as it relates to that goal. Anything else come to mind? And again, if something does, you can always send us emails and we can get that into the draft that you all will look at your January meeting before approving.
Dawa, one question. I'm not sure if this fits under another bullet that you're going to get to, but the neighborhood matching grants and the event that was held where a lot of neighborhoods again got together, that might be something to put here too.
I think that's great. So we'll capture that too. We'll get the neighborhood matching grant. And just want to again say thank you to all of you that were able to show up for that celebration. I thought it was a really great evening, and the turnout was pretty encouraging. All right, fantastic. This is just what we need. All right, so the next goal, just reflecting back, was to connect rental property owners with resources and information, encouraging acceptance of housing vouchers. And I recall that there had been conversations over the course of the year about where the committee wanted to focus their attention, and the Festival of Neighborhoods and the bylaws were two areas where a lot of time was spent. So the timing works out kind of nicely on this, because again, this is your 2023 annual report, and just last week, we got a request from Thrive Asheville, who has received some ARPA funding from the city. And they are doing a big push right now to connect people who have rental properties, to encourage them to use housing vouchers. So if you all would like, I just put this out there for your consideration. If you want to contribute to this goal, and it's okay if you just want to table it and say we had some other priorities, but if you do, there could be an opportunity to just pass on the information through your networks, and then that would certainly be aligned with what your mission is as a commission, to be aligned with this goal, and we can provide that information to you all. So that's really up to the committee if you want to help push that information that Thrive Asheville has been.
Is that something that's already
creating.
being done? I'm thinking of, there's a young man that works with me in reparation and housing, and that's what they're doing. And so, I can't think of his name right now, I'm sorry, but I think that if there's something that he's already doing, they're already doing it. The housing authority, I think that's the next step, to find out what the housing authority is already doing, because we wouldn't want to roll over what they've already in the process of doing. And I don't know how far that process with them is, but I know they are working on vouchers for people for their, rental property, which used to be called Section 8, and for other things like that. So maybe that'd be something maybe we can get somebody from housing to come in and talk to us about that maybe.
Sure. I think the more information that you all have, we're happy to help. We're happy to help arrange that to get them in on the agenda. And this particular piece that I put up there with the question mark is real. It's a marketing push that they have. So they've got their program. So the only to do with respect to this one would be if NAC members wanted to share those posts through your individual networks. So it's all coming through on social media. There'll be information about it on the City of Asheville Facebook page and Instagram page, for example. So it could just be an opportunity to take that and share. All right.
You're asking us if we want to commit to that? Do we need to?
Well, at that one, that's up to you. I think probably the choice would be either in the annual report, we just say, we can draft for you all, that the Festival of Neighborhoods, for example, and the revamping of the bylaws were where the committee decided to spend their time and energy, and then this one was put to the side, given all of the goals that you already had. So it's really up to you all. I would say we'll need to talk about what happened with the goal. We could say we pushed information that we got related to it, or that the committee just decided to table that for 2023.
Kim Roney has something.
Maybe you can stay up here with me, because I think my question is for you. So if an advisory board member was like, I want to take that on, could you send me more information? And then they sent it out to the neighborhood groups between now and December, they could add it to the annual report? Is that what I'm getting? So when is the annual report due?
It's due January. They're due near the end of January.
So at the January meeting of NAC, you would be approving the neighborhood, like advisory committee's report, and that could be updated.
Absolutely.
But it seems to me like, would it be helpful for neighborhood advisory committee to see what is being asked to be shared before that decision is made?
Right, and
Okay,
so I was thinking about the wording, how we would word that before we put it out there, that we have to think about.
Yeah, if it's something that can go in newsletters, and it's like, oh, we're gonna send this to Burton Street and Kenilworth, and like, reach out to East West Asheville Neighborhood Association, it seems like some part of this where it would become part of a goal and accomplishment of NAC is missing, and it's, what's the ask? So maybe
Yeah.
we could distribute it?
And this is really up to you all. So this was an idea that's coming from staff, and this is your decision. This is your decision to make. It was just fortunate that we, as city staff, were asked by Thrive last week if we could push that through the city's channels, and we will be. So it will go out through neighborhood news, it will go out on our socials. And I just wanted to say, if y'all wanted to have some momentum on that and decide, well, yeah, we can go to the city's Facebook page, share what the city is sharing through our personal networks, then that could be some momentum in that area.
And it seems like you're kind of responding to an existing goal and accomplishment. So it's like literally, if y'all wanted to do this as the neighborhood advisory committee members, then follow-up could come after we, as the city, share this information with NAC.
That's right. So
Okay.
there wouldn't need to be the
Thank you for
need to,
clarifying.
no, thank you for asking the opportunity to clarify. So it wouldn't be generating new content. It would literally just be going to the city's Facebook page and sharing something through your social networks. Or if you're at a neighborhood meeting, say, hey, I know Thrive Asheville has this program. They've got this website. Check out the website.
And it also seems like it's very much aligned with the two presentations we have on the agenda tonight around housing issues. And so that might be something, we get all of the information and then say, yes, we can push links to several different ways that the city is addressing.
Yes, yes. all of those are options and certainly fall under the information sharing piece of the commission. But again, it's really up to you all. I think there were ambitious goals set for 2023. And we had different people come on and off of the committee, and it's really your choice about whether or not you want to keep that one or not.
I'm certainly okay with us just saying, yeah, other priorities took place. We didn't get to this as much as we wanted. This is how we're going to start doing it. The remainder of this year, but we plan to continue pursuing that in the coming year using some of the examples that you suggested. And certainly, I would like to have like Thrive Asheville come and like talk to us, be on our agenda, or like other people that are involved in that area. I would love to have them come and just be on our agenda, give us a presentation, and let us know what we can do to help them.
Or like a partnership or involvement of, assistance.
I feel like we're really a conduit for information, so we just need to get the people in front of us here to give us the information so then we can disseminate.
And as we gather more information, that we can, it'd just be a small
Perfect.
bird, not
Yeah.
just to go out. And then we could follow up through the following, into 2024, about more information and how we can assist with that. That sounds good to me.
Excellent. And we're going to get there in a minute. I know a place with your 2024 goals that will slide in very well,
Yeah.
right? So we won't have to recreate any wheels. But I think what I'm hearing is that we say we had other areas where we were focusing attention on. We're aware of this opportunity and look forward to more opportunities to share information in 2024. And then we can plan, Meredith, to ask Thrive to come and give a presentation on what they're doing in that area.
And maybe the representative from the Reparations Commission who's working in that focus area,
Somebody
I
from
would
the
certainly like to
housing.
hear from them as well, if they're available.
Sure. All right, so we'll put those feelers out and see if folks would be, if we can get them on the agenda. Great. Excellent. Very helpful. All right, the last goal for 2023 was to support the Asheville Fire Department and emergency preparedness programming. And again, the Festival of Neighborhoods was a conduit for that. They had a booth there. Information was shared with available and shared with neighborhoods, but wanted to check if there were other things that you wanted to make sure we put into that report for you all before you see it in January.
We had several presentations from the fire department and other areas about emergency preparedness, and we had quite a few presentations. I was
Yeah.
looking back at my notes.
Perfect, so yep, we can get that in there, that the committee received presentations from the fire department. Excellent. That sounds good. Okay. So some additional accomplishments, and this is certainly not to say that it's all, but wanted to give you guys a good jumping off point to spark some ideas. But the update of the NAC bylaws was an area where you all spent a lot of time. And then I've listed 3 different times where there were staff presentations and there was feedback given by the committee. So just wanted to really memorialize that there had been that exchange between staff and the Neighborhood Advisory Committee. All right, so I will move on. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. And again, if there's something else that you all want to make sure is captured, you can always email us, and then we'll get that in the draft for you to look at. So another section of the annual report is the policy recommendations. So I wanted to note that in October 2023, there was the unanimous vote. So that was last month where the Neighborhood Advisory Committee recommended that council delay the action on a proposed flag lots and the cottage court text amendments. So I know that that's something very important to the city clerk's office, that anytime there's anything that is moving from the Neighborhood Advisory Committee and they'd like the full council, that we've done a really good job of keeping a track record of that. And this is one area where we can do that. Another thing that the city clerk's office is asking, and this is aligned with our organization's work in our departmental equity action plans, is that any recommendations that are coming from boards and commissions, consider an equity lens in those recommendations. So in this annual report, we've been asked to provide, or you all have been asked to provide, we together have been asked to provide input or comments on whether or not an equity lens had informed the recommendation. And so what you see there in orange, those questions, who's most impacted, who will benefit from or be burdened by the project, and then what strategies could mitigate unintended consequences for neighborhoods, are all things that we're going to want to continually consider as we move forward 2024. But I wanted to pause here and see if there is anything that in your discussion last month you want to make sure is captured as giving honor to using an equity lens as you came up with your recommendation for that particular item.
I mean, other than, I think it was a big point in our discussion. We had a very lengthy discussion by several neighborhoods that might be impacted, and I know those questions were posed a lot. I mean, I don't know how else to capture that, but that, from what I recall, it was a big piece.
Yeah, CAN was very, when they came too, they were more, that's who would be most impacted, the neighborhoods, people in the neighborhoods. And as they broke down the RS8 and RS4, and how the houses, what would benefit from or burden by the project. Benefit would be developers would be able to put more houses close together. The burden would be on the people that live next door. And so what we focus on are communities and people, not just what developers can bring into this space. And that was why we did want to delay the action, because we did not have clarity. And I don't know if we'll be ready in January, because it's still a lot of questions that need to be answered. You're talking about, especially with the flag lots. I mean, it's going to, and it's starting to encroach into historical neighborhoods that really it shouldn't be there in those spaces, because the first thing that I've heard from people in my neighborhood is that you're putting these houses, these flag lots so close together, but you do not have fire hydrants. If there's a fire, somebody else's house is going to be impacted, and you won't be able to get there quick enough. Or the disruption of the family unit by crunching all these people close together because you're looking for space. And I think that it was, and every time that I hear a developer talk about it, I think that they talk about how many people want to move into Asheville and how much space, but what is that doing for the people that are already here, that have been here? And so I think that was some questions. Still think there's some things that we need to talk about before the board would give a unanimous vote, because I think we're still lost in some areas.
So it sounded like for the annual report, we could just note that the Neighborhood Advisory Committee had concerns about the unintended consequences to different neighborhoods, and that influenced the recommendation to delay the vote.
Right.
How does that sound to you guys?
The other thing is, I did see that the middle housing report came out, and I haven't made it through it because it's 150 pages, which is great because it's very thorough. But I also haven't, so far, I haven't seen anything about what the impact of dense population would be for crime rates. Because as populations go up, we've all seen it, the crime is increasing quite a bit in Asheville. And the population would just go up significantly more, the more housing you create.
Gotcha. So it sounds like another bullet that we'd want to pull out if we wanted to say, some examples of what the unintended consequences could be. Could be crime, it could be fire service, or how quickly the fire department can get to calls. So we can definitely draft that up.
I've never seen anything that links density to crime rate. Oh, I could show you a lot. I can show you the opposite.
All right.
Rural communities have just as much crime.
That's not true.
That is true.
my point would be that we're just not ready. I mean, you know, I value everybody's opinion. We all have different opinions on things, but I would want to see more clarity on what exactly, you know, is proposed and what's going to be done and how it's going to be done, because I'm just not, you want to crowd people up into spaces. And I think with what you're saying about the crime rate going up, and I'm gonna say this because I've lived here all my life, the only way I can see that would be happening is that when you start crunching people into spaces, they have no room outside to grow. So kids are not outside playing, they go to school and come home, so you can have a possibility of that happening because, you know, they stay on, these kids now stay more on their, you know, games, and those games are horrible. But they don't have any outside, they don't have a place to play. They don't have a place to be kids. You're gonna crowd all these people in, but you want people to come here, and if people come with their kids, where will their kids play? And so they end up being non-sociable. So I think that's a whole different, I just think we're not ready. Just some things that, just everybody's personal opinion, and everybody has a right to their personal opinion. But I'm just saying that I think it's just something that we would have to really sit down and say, you know, right now, because I've learned a lot. Developers make the money. They're making the money.
Well,
They coming into my neighborhood cheap, paying what they wouldn't pay for what they would pay in North Asheville or some of these other places. And they're getting their property and they're just piling houses, just piling them up. And so I understand your point, and I understand what you say too, but we got to look at the big picture. So let's go on.
Yeah, gotcha. That sounds good. I think we have what we need to draft that in the annual report.
So at the last meeting, we voted to recommend that the city council delay the action, and they did. They delayed action. It's coming back up again in January.
Yep.
Is it on the, I don't know for certain that it's on the agenda,
I
council
thought it got
agenda.
delayed to the same time that cottage courts were being considered. I'm just wondering if, when that meeting is, that it's on the agenda, and if it, since we don't have a meeting till January, is that something that's going to come before us again after having the missing middle housing study, which has some of the displacement analysis as part of it, and maybe we can make a more informed recommendation at that time.
If I remember, their next meeting is the 24th of January, and that's when they were going to review it for both of them.
Okay, so that's,
But I don't know if that's still on their agenda.
So we can definitely find out when it's going to be on council's agenda. If it's the 24th, that might be fortunate, because I think your meeting is on the 22nd. And then we can, as we work with the chair and vice chair to develop the agenda for that meeting, we'll have that information for you all. And if it is going to be in January, just make sure that we get something, if we do our best to get something
Yeah.
on your agenda.
Kim Roney had something else.
That might help so you would have what we have. Our draft 8-week agenda has January 23rd as public hearings for the UDO amendment for flag lots and cottage development. And you can find the 8-week agenda for council anytime you go to ashevillec.gov, click on government, click on agendas, and then scroll to the bottom where you'll see the 8-week agenda. Once again, that's always a draft and it can change.
So what will that mean? The 23rd, you said?
Those are the public hearings.
The public hearing, but that would just be for anybody to come in to say how they feel about. And see, that's a thing that kind of bothers me, that people that might be affected by it may not know about this public hearing, to be able to come and to express how they feel about it.
Well, we'll also add that it looks like the Neighborhood Advisory Committee is the night before. So if you wanted to put that on your agenda for January, Neighborhood Advisory Committee meeting, and have a deeper discussion based on the missing middle, as your liaison, I'm happy to turn that around and make sure council would have it the next day before the public hearing if you have a formal recommendation.
as well as additional, I mean, people can come here and talk to us, give public comment at our meeting, as well as they can go to the council meeting the next day if they want.
And that way, if for any reason, if the council schedule changes, then you would have even more time to have a conversation about missing middle and the Unified Development Ordinance changes.
So Meredith, when would CAM meet again?
I'm not sure. I think they were meeting even quarterly
Okay,
currently.
maybe we need to get in contact,
They may meet in January. Okay.
may need to get in contact with the president of CAN, and so that we could be, I think if we were all on the same page, it would help to know, because I had to drop out of that meeting, so I didn't get to hear all of it in CAN. So maybe we need to just probably get some, I'll get with Ms. Sophie Dixon too, because she's on that, and I think it's just communication. It's just talking to people. It's just finding out, because we all gonna be on the same page. We all wanna see the same thing. That it was like, Elizabeth and I was sitting there waiting for our turn at the council meeting, and we didn't have to say anything.
Well, I think for the purposes of the annual report, I think it's fair to say we're continuing to explore
Right.
these questions and the strategies, and that we will,
Okay.
I think before tonight, we could say, yes, we want to make sure that we get the word out and communicate about our meeting on the 22nd, so that we can continue that
Yeah.
discussion.
Is there a December meeting for NAC? No.
No.
So one of the things that might be useful, I know I certainly appreciate the volunteer lived and professional experiences that you bring to this table. The missing middle housing study that you noted is quite long, also includes displacement risk consideration. And that might be something that would be helpful to hear from Coalition of Asheville Neighborhoods, but also the legacy neighborhoods. I'd be grateful if you'd add to my understanding on that. I'm sure the whole council would. So it's something to consider in addition to missing middle is also displacement risk. So we can ask the questions of the neighborhoods to be better able to inform this from an equity lens.
Okay.
I believe
me know if it helps.
that report got delayed because there was a request for a displacement study. And that's why they delayed it, was to have time to do that.
If anyone wants to get a subcommittee together and look at that, I'll be reading the same document. So feel free to reach out. Happy to support.
Thank you.
Thanks,
All right, this has all been very helpful, and it helps me understand how to frame the equity question. It's very clear to me that what went behind the idea of asking to delay the action had everything to do with the equity of the decision. So we'll just make sure that we're very clear about that for this annual report. And then as far as the January agenda, I think we've got some good direction on how to support you all in getting that up and running. Okay, so budget impacts. That's another part of the annual report. So for any generally, if there were any recommendations that the committee came up with, the question that's being asked is what type of budget impact might that have? And I know in the conversations about the Festival of Neighborhoods, I recall conversations that it would be really helpful if there was funding outside of some funding that our department was able to provide for it. So put that there as a placeholder. If that feels good to you all, happy to include that. And that was just based off of what was spent this year and just some things we knew that we couldn't do because we didn't have the budget to do it. All right.
So the 3,000 is an increase of whatever we spent this year?
It was about like 800 to 1,000 is about how much we spent this year, but I know that we knew that there were a lot of things that we weren't able to do,
Gotcha.
so we bumped it up to 3,000.
This budget will allow us to do some of this.
Yeah.
Because there was no official budget.
No, it just
for
came out of our
this.
department budget, just for our community engagement. I mean, it was certainly a well-matched way to invest those funds, but this would be something dedicated just to the Festival of Neighborhoods. All right, so here we go. We're getting close to the end. The NAC goals that you all talked about at your retreat, there they are again. One was to increase NAC engagement with Asheville residents, and that is the place where you all did some prioritization of some different things that are on work plans. So imagining that working group could dig a little bit deeper into what those things are and then give staff some insight about who to schedule to give presentations. Second goal, organize and hold a Festival of Neighborhoods. And then third was to nominate and celebrate a Volunteer of the Year. And so again, you all will officially adopt those when you adopt the annual report. But that's what we've got right now. So if you have other thoughts about that, please
Yes,
do.
can I give another one? I think that would be fun if the city would approve it, that NAC would be involved in, included in the Christmas parade or the holiday parade, as they call it. however we represent our neighborhoods. I think that would be something that people still don't know what NAC is and what they do, and how we're here to, to help and engage with neighborhoods. Everyone is here. I think that would be nice to be able to have, something in the holiday parade.
Let's get that in that list of things for the working groups. Yeah, to discuss under the engagement one. I mean, I would certainly say that's more engagement. Yeah,
That would go
yeah.
along with your festival of neighborhoods
Yeah.
and the representation of, all the different, especially the diversity of the neighborhoods and who's in your neighborhood. I think that would.
Bring their flags.
I
all the
mean,
things
that could be a fun
display.
float.
See?
That could be a fun float. I think so. Great, so yeah, we'll make sure we capture that, and again, that's just a starter list that you all put together, that engagement working group can, whatever you all are moved to do. So then the last thing, I think the last update that I had, yes, today was just the meeting schedule, so just to remind everybody that back on September 25th, there was a unanimous vote to switch to an every other month meeting schedule with working groups meeting on the off months.
I was trying to wrap my mind around that when we had all the lists of invitations and then half of them were rescinded, and I still don't have a clear idea of when those meetings are. Is that going to be, can that be?
Oh, absolutely, yes, we can do that.
Sent and like in a list?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
I've lost
Yep.
track and my calendar revolted, so.
Yes, absolutely. And so we're starting in January, and then it would be every other month. But we will put all of those specific dates and include them in the next agenda, for your next agenda. So that'll come out in the materials ahead of the meeting. All right, well, those are my staff updates. And again, just invite you all, if anything sparks that you want to make sure is in that annual report, just send that to us, and you will all have an opportunity to look at it before you approve it in January, and then we'll get those things to City Council. Some might even be the night after our meeting. All right, appreciate y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're gonna move on to unfinished business, the homeless strategy, division updates from Emily Ball, homeless strategy, division manager, community and economic development department. That was a lot. I got it.
I appreciate you saying it instead of me. Good evening. I am glad to be with you all. Just want to share some updates about homelessness in our community, about what our division is doing, about how our community is responding, and I am certainly happy to answer any questions throughout. I'll skip right through that. So I'm sorry to say I don't have a good sense of baseline. I'm not sure what you all do and don't know about homelessness as an issue or what's happening in our community. So I apologize if some of this is familiar content for you. But in my experience, I've worked on homelessness a long time. I've been at the city almost 4 years, and prior to that was at Homeward Bound for about a decade. And in my experience, homelessness is such a complex issue, and people often have a lot of misconceptions and misunderstandings. So I always like to start with just what is happening. Why are people homeless in our community? So what we know is that people lose their housing when crises occur, and their social and financial safety nets are not robust enough to support them. So what that means is that there's often a significant correlation with trauma, often coincides with mental health and substance use disorders, disability, unemployment, and things like that. And also, we know that most people who experience those things are not homeless, but are people who live in housing in our community and across the country. The majority of people who experience homelessness are homeless only once in their lives and for less than 2 weeks. So when people have a housing crisis, they dip into that housing service system, get their needs met, and are able to get back to some stability. And housing, it's not often what we think of when we think of homelessness, because the more visible homelessness is often people who've been outside for a very long time. We know from national research that the #1 indicator of rates of homelessness in any community is housing cost. So we also know that our community is wrestling heavily with housing costs all the time. Housing costs have really increased here significantly. We see in national data that high poverty communities that have low housing costs and enough housing stock have lower rates of homelessness. So there's certainly a relationship between poverty and homelessness, but if people can afford housing, then they will be housed. They don't become homeless in communities that have a lot of wealth and have a lot of and have high housing costs and little housing availability, which certainly describes our community, we can see higher rates of homelessness. I'm sure this is clear to you all that we had a significant increase in homelessness during the pandemic. We had a really drastic impact on this particular issue in the pandemic. The beginning, a lot of our shelters across the community locked down early. They were concerned about keeping their folks safe, their staff, and their existing clients. And so services were cut and haven't fully returned. And at the same time, we had an increase in need. So more folks who were losing housing, needed housing assistance. I would say almost everyone's mental health and substance use worsened during the pandemic, and that certainly applies for folks who might not have housing. What we saw is that the largest pandemic-driven increase was people who are unsheltered specifically. So if you look at the data from those 4 years, we do a point-in-time count every January that works like a census to try to connect with as many folks as possible on a single night and understand who's homeless in our community and what their household characteristics are. If you look at the 2020 data, I think of that as our pre-pandemic baseline. That's a January count, and the data there, that 547, is pretty typical of what our homeless population has looked like for the decade or so prior to the pandemic. And you can see that of those 547, 65 people were unsheltered, meaning on the street, camping, in a car, place not meant for human habitation. What changed over the course of the pandemic is our homeless population increased, but not all that significantly, 547 in 2020 to 637 at our peak in 2022. But the really significant increase for us was where people were while they were homeless. So our unsheltered population increased. I was an English major, but I am pretty sure that this is 257%. That's 65 to 232. So just huge increase in the number of folks who are outside, even though our total homeless population didn't increase all that much.
You're right, I just did the math.
So you're basically saying that they just become more visible because they're not spending the night in shelters. They're out on the street more? Is that and I'm saying that because I hear a lot of people saying there's so many homeless people now. It's just that they're more visible now because they're unsheltered.
We don't have the shelters. And during
That's what I mean.
lockdown, men couldn't get into the shelters.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
there's less availability and more homeless people, both.
Well, I'm just looking at the totals, in 2020, 547 to 573, that's, not even a 5% increase, but what you're saying is they're more where they are, so they're more visible to people that are making those comments. I think it's an interesting shift in that perspective that really, it's just now that you're seeing them because they're not behind closed doors at night.
Mm-hmm. So it's very accurate. I won't go through all of this, but these are some of the characteristics from that 2023 point-in-time count. Obviously, that's almost a year old now, so we'll be doing the next point-in-time count in January. But some subpopulation characteristics. Two things I think are really noteworthy. One, we have a really disproportionately large subpopulation of veterans who are homeless in our community. Nationally, veterans are 6% of the homeless population. Locally, veterans are 34% of the homeless population. And that's, in my opinion, that's related to two main things. One, we have a VA medical center here, and that's a regional hospital, and so certainly folks are coming from across the region for that care. And two, ABCCM in particular, you all may be familiar with them. They have a very large federally funded transitional housing program for veterans, so also folks are coming here for that particular intervention. Because we have such a large subpopulation of veterans who are homeless, we also have a lot of federal dollars to provide housing interventions for veterans who are homeless. So our data look bad and will continue to look bad, but we actually have a good kind of system for folks who are homeless veterans. The other thing that I'll mention is in that household composition section, vast majority of folks who are homeless in our community are single adults. We've not historically had a large subpopulation of families, meaning a parent with children. So what do we do about homelessness? Because ending homelessness requires many independent organizations and systems to work together, the federal government designed the Continuum of Care program to create a framework for collaboration, system development, and decision-making. And what I mean by that is that there's no single entity, including the city of Asheville, that controls all of the elements you need or provides all of the services needed in order to fully respond to the issues. So the goal of the Continuum of Care is to develop a local planning body that's just a way of organizing stakeholders to work together. So can we, my first couple of years in this role, I had a lot of folks in the community telling me they wanted a seat at the table, and I was like, we don't have a table. I don't know, that doesn't exist in our community, but the intention of the Continuum of Care is to build that table, bring those key stakeholders, bring all stakeholders, but really bring key stakeholders, big systems of care around a common table to do that planning work together and make decisions together. The Continuum of Care, again, this is a federal design, has 3 components. So the first is a Continuum of Care membership body that's intended to be a large body of stakeholders who are aligned with the goal of ending homelessness. So that should be open to anyone who is interested in the issue and wants to take action. That could be all of you, that can be service providers, that can be business folks, anyone across the community. The second is a Continuum of Care board, which is the leadership body that governs the Continuum of Care. Again, that's just a planning body. The board should be elected by that Continuum of Care membership. And the board's responsible for setting strategic direction, policy, and allocating resources. Because this is a federal program, there are about $2 million of federal funding available to our community, to Buncombe County, for homeless and housing response. So the Continuum of Care Board, leadership body governing this COC, currently that is the Homeless Initiative Advisory Committee, HIAC, so an advisory committee in the city's structure, just like NAC. And then the third component is the COC lead agency, and that's an entity designated by the board to provide infrastructure and support. So that is my job. That's the City of Asheville is the designated lead agency for our local Continuum of Care, and the Homeless Strategy Division within the city's staff structure fulfills that responsibility. The goal of a Continuum of Care is to develop a comprehensive system that responds to homelessness effectively. Again, we've got to bring all these stakeholders to that common table to set goals, strategies, really focus on this system as a closed system. So look at, who's becoming homeless and how do we change that? And how long are people homeless within the system? And then who's exiting homelessness and how do we increase that? The system the Continuum of Care should critically evaluate the performance based on data, amplify what is working, change what's not working, and then strategically allocate resources through a transparent process to support programs that will most further those goals. The way that I think about a homelessness response system is really similar to a healthcare system. So you all may remember, you've been here all your life, you said you may remember that our community had a 10-year plan to end homelessness. Lots of communities did that. That was a big federal push years ago. And I think that has confused a lot of people about what our objective is. The way that I think about this is that the homeless system ought to be similar to a healthcare system, meaning we're never going to end the need for healthcare, right? It doesn't matter how good we get at prevention, wearing our seatbelts, early detection. We're always going to need an emergency room. We're always going to need a well-coordinated slate of healthcare services because we are human beings, and those are needs that we have. I think homelessness is really similar. People are always going to have a housing crisis, and if we have a well-developed homelessness response system, then we can treat that crisis effectively, resolve it for that person so they don't continue to be homeless. To me, that's the goal. That system should be really well coordinated. We should have shared data. We should have a comprehensive range of services that are based on the needs. So we shouldn't have a lot of family shelter beds if we don't have a lot of homeless families, for example. Services should be easy to navigate and accessible to anyone who needs them. We should be able to match the intervention with the need, meaning we understand what that need is so we can apply the right intervention. Should be evidence-based, data-driven, and person-centered, most importantly. We never want to lose sight of the fact that we're just talking about human beings who are in extreme distress, extreme crisis in our community. We want to keep that at the center of everything that's happening. In our community, you may relate to this. I would say in our community, the current state is that messy jumble on the left. And that right now it's really hard for folks to find the right service that they need. It's hard for us to understand who is homeless, what all of our services are, how do people get engaged with them. People get stuck in homelessness for a really long time in this community. But the goal is to move to that future state where we have a clear pathway, we understand how to help folks navigate through the system to resolve that housing crisis. So our role, again, we are the lead agency for the continuum of care. So our role in our division, in the homeless strategy division, is to provide that administrative and strategic support to the board and committees to help develop that homeless service system, help move us from that current state to that future state continually through training, technical assistance, and coordination. We do a lot of data collection and management. We manage the community process for agencies to apply for that $2 million of federal funding. We facilitate that annual point in time count. We monitor funded agencies to ensure compliance and then work on engaging new stakeholders in the COC. And I should mention that as lead agency, we have zero power, right? We don't have any authority. That's not what this is. What this is again trying to build this table that people come to collectively, and we want to support the infrastructure and the efforts to help make that happen. The city also, of course, in addition to being the lead agency, is local government, and as a local government entity has a role in responding to homelessness. From my view, that role is really to provide resources that further the continuum of care's work and to align operational policies and practices with the continuum of care's goals. Rather than kind of operating alone, we want to bring the city and county and other partners all to that common table. And you can see some of the ways that the city specifically invests in homelessness response currently.
Is the Purple Bag pilot?
Purple Bag Pilot is an initiative from the sanitation division that often folks who are homeless are storing their belongings, and they might be storing them in trash bags or retail bags, and sometimes it's not always clear to folks if those are trash or if those are people's belongings. So to be sure to really differentiate between that, make sure people can keep their stuff and that we can throw trash away. The sanitation division piloted this Purple Bag initiative where they literally just bought a bunch of purple trash bags and they distribute those to folks who are homeless to differentiate between these are belongings you want to keep and these are things that sanitation should pick up. 2023. So because we had such, you all may be familiar with this, because we had such a big increase in unsheltered homelessness in the pandemic, Dogwood Health Trust funded a consultancy to bring a national expert for some local needs assessment and comprehensive recommendations. That was the National Alliance to End Homelessness. They conducted that needs assessment and they provided the results at a joint meeting of City Council and County Commission in January. They gave us literally 112 recommendations of ways that our community can improve our response to homelessness. And their primary recommendation was to realign how we work together by restructuring the continuum of care. Really recognizing that we have not had the type of planning body, the type of participatory leadership body that works effectively in other communities to fully respond to the issue. We've had a lot of confusion about who's responsible for what and who has what opportunity to act. So the recommendation was to restructure the continuum of care specifically by moving the COC board out of the city and county structure. So COC board currently is HIAC. And by establishing that formal membership body of stakeholders. In our community, we've had a homeless coalition for many years, since the 90s, that has been a group of folks who work on homelessness who meet regularly to share information, but that's not been a formalized body and it's not had a direct relationship with the governance board, which is HIAC. Additional priority recommendations from the Alliance were to implement an encampment resolution policy that's very complicated, as you might imagine, to build the capacity of street outreach, increase crisis response capacity, that means beds where people can be, increase that capacity by adding low barrier shelter beds. We have a number of folks in our community who are unsheltered partly because they aren't able to access the type of shelter that's available here. begin the implementation of system improvements to coordinated entry. Coordinated entry is the structure through which people access services. It's really back to that graphic of kind of a jumbled mess and a clear pathway. That clear pathway is what coordinated entry is designed to do. Create a high utilizer targeted initiative, meaning who are the folks who are constantly being arrested, constantly going to the hospital, clearly have very acute needs. Can we target some response for those folks? Promote a housing surge of unsheltered people, and then implement moving on strategies, meaning can we help people who are in housing programs who were formerly homeless as they've stabilized? Can we create a pathway for them to graduate from that program, freeing up a slot so that someone who's currently homeless can come into that program? So HIAC, as our Continuum of Care Board, began implementation of those recommendations. They adopted community values. They adopted the recommended goal of reducing unsheltered homelessness by 50% by the 2025 point-in-time count. And then they established 4 work groups with really good, I think, good composition of multiple sectors across the community to address the first set of priority recommendations. So that was a shelter work group, an outreach and encampment response, coordinated entry, and then governance to work on that restructure. Progress from those work groups. The shelter work group issued a request for proposals, and through that process planned shelter expansion with 43 new beds this fall. So those are 3 beds at Haywood Street Respite, 20 beds at Salvation Army, and 20 beds at Safe Shelter, which is it's a collaboration of 3 churches, Trinity United Methodist, Grace Episcopal, and Grace Covenant Presbyterian, and is currently hosted at the A Hope Day Center. They're leasing that space from Homeward Bound. Those 43 beds were developed through that process, and then HIAC submitted that funding request to the city and county, and those beds were funded through ARPA funding, but jointly funded by the city and county. And that work group also recommended a planning process for a new long-term shelter. As you mentioned earlier, that's a gap we know we have in our community. So that planning process has just barely begun. There's not much to share about that yet, but there is a group of folks that's looking at best practices in other communities and how to develop the type of shelter that can be effective long-term. The governance work group has worked very hard to develop a new continuum of care charter to fulfill that restructuring recommendation. They've established a nominating and membership committee to begin building that membership body as kind of the first phase. And then that membership body, once established, will elect a new continuum of care boards. Membership drive is happening right now. And I expect that the new continuum of care board will be elected early in 2024. I don't know exactly, February, perhaps, March. We also have made a number of infrastructure improvements. Some of this, in implementing the Alliance recommendations, there are some actions that we can take as staff. Many of those we can't. They're really dependent on that continuum of care structure. But some of these are establishing data sharing. We manage a database that service providers throughout the community use to report client-level information so we can understand how people are flowing through the system, how long people are homeless, when they leave a shelter, where do they go? Are they back on the streets? Are they moving into a permanent housing option? Data sharing in that system is one of the core functionalities that it has so that agencies can see that they're both working with the same person. So if I'm that person, I don't need to repeat my information to 2 different agencies because you already have that. We've not had that function in our community in the past, and so establishing data sharing is a good step forward for us. We're also working on a community-wide by name list of people who are experiencing homelessness so that we can really understand the full universe of folks who need housing and can help prioritize those folks for inflow into housing interventions. We're doing a lot of capacity building right now, We have an annual training calendar for service providers and for the community. One of the things that we've done in our division is begin a monthly learning series on homelessness. It's very basic information, but really just intended to help people understand sort of the core pieces about why people are homeless, about what we can do in response, and then about how people can take action as community members to improve response. And then lastly, we are doing a lot of coordination and collaboration. We, again, back to that graphic about our jumbled service system in the community, we have a lot of people and a lot of agencies who are doing a lot of work on homelessness, and often they're moving in very different directions. They may not know each other. We don't have kind of good system level coordination. One thing that I think is tricky about the continuum of care is that the goal is to build a system out of a bunch of component parts that were developed organically. So someone started a nonprofit, or a nonprofit saw need and started a program, volunteers started an initiative, but none of that was done kind of in keeping with this big picture bird's eye view about the system as a whole. So now we have all these component parts. We want to build those into a system, but we need those component parts to opt into that process, buy into the value of that. That takes time, takes a lot of relationship development, relationship management, and bringing people together so that they can understand what they have in common and how we can build on that. So we're doing a lot of that coordination right now. We've got leadership meeting of shelter and housing organizations regularly. We have agencies that have outreach staff. We have those folks meeting weekly right now to do some multidisciplinary outreach. So really trying to, again, bring folks around that common table. We also have a great new community capacity this fall compared to just a couple months ago. If it is a Code Purple night, are y'all familiar with Code Purple? So tonight, for example, is Code Purple night. On a Code Purple night, we have 221 more beds available than we had just 2 months ago, which is a big step forward for us, and that is a combination of what you see up there. So Homeward Bound's Compass Point Village, which is a permanent supportive housing development on Tunnel Road, has opened. They have 85 units of permanent supportive housing there. Those 43 new shelter beds have come online and are occupied. And then Code Purple, we have 91 shelter beds available, which is 16 more than we had last year. Code Purple providers are ABCCM and Salvation Army, and we also have expanded weather criteria this year. So historically, Code Purple has only been when the temperature is 32 or below. This year, it's also when the temperature is 33 to 40 with precipitation. So that means we'll have big net gain in the number of nights that people are able to be inside through those shelters. 2 other capacity expansions. Shangri-La and Step Up have purchased the Ramada in East Asheville and are working on 113 units of permanent housing that'll be open for occupancy in 2024. And then the Asheville Fire Department's Community Responder Program is providing outreach to folks who are unsheltered and, responding to other community needs as they encounter them, but many of the folks that they're engaging with are people who are unsheltered. So it's been a good addition of street outreach capacity in our community. I know I've talked a long time. This is my last slide, I'm pretty sure. So some opportunities to engage further are to attend that learning series that I mentioned. That's going to, Debbie Alford is on my team in the Homeless Strategy Division. She facilitates that. That's a monthly recurring event, 3-part series. Folks are able to come for any or all of those. You can skip months.
And Emily, just sorry to interrupt you. Christina's at home, and she saw that the November dates were up there, and actually, if you escape out of the PowerPoint, she put the December ones in there, so it should refresh, because there are December dates for that. There you go.
She is on it, Christina.
Yeah.
Thank you, Christina.
Great. So the learning series, recurring monthly next, and it's rotating around different locations across the community and also different times of day and days of the week. So really trying to cast a wide net. Same content every month, but trying to help people get kind of that baseline understanding of the issue. So you can see the December series is at Stevens Lee. Registration for that is on the city's website. We also, this coming Monday, December 4th from 9 to noon, we have a joint meeting with City Council and County Commission. That's a follow-up to the joint meeting they had in January where they heard the recommendations from the Alliance. And this is a meeting on implementations, the progress made on implementing those recommendations over the past year. Certainly an opportunity to volunteer for the point in time count. That'll be coming up January 30th, and we'll be sharing that information out soon. And then lastly, and most importantly to me, is becoming a member of the continuum of care. This is literally today, I sent the website copy to our website person to get that membership form up on our website. So this is happening right now, but I have a lot of optimism about what this can mean for our community. It's not kind of the most glamorous thing that we're working on, but it is the thing that I think will have the most impact long-term if we can really build that table correctly, really get folks into those seats and working together. I think that has huge, huge potential to build the system that we need sustainably in our community to continue to respond to homelessness. Again, anticipating that new charter will be adopted and the new board will be elected early in 2024. Happy to answer any questions.
I have two questions. The first one's kind of like a data question. You said that not many families, it's mostly single adults, not many families who are experiencing homelessness. Might that be because children might be removed from the home before it got to that point, or maybe parents have sent their children to live with other family members, perhaps? Like, what I'm asking is that potentially an underreporting of the number of families?
Yes, great question. So when I talk about homelessness, I mean specifically the federal definition of literal homelessness. There's in anything you have to eventually give shape to something, and so I would differentiate between literal homelessness and housing instability. I don't have any data on folks who just have housing instability, and I would say it's probably fairly impossible for anyone to have really accurate data on that. So only the people in the point-in-time count are only people who are literally homeless, meaning street shelter or transitional housing. And yes, I think you're exactly right. I think many folks who end up literally homeless probably have worked out other options for their kids, staying with family, as you mentioned, maybe have lost custody. Certainly that's very common. So yes, I can't give you a data answer, but I think your instinct on that is exactly right.
Okay. And then my second question is related to Code Purple. I'm really happy that the criteria got expanded. I think 32 degrees is still too cold, or 40 degrees is still too cold. I always wonder whenever we talk about Code Purple, like, why can't those beds just be available all the time? And I'm sure there's a good reason for that, like maybe certain requirements are waived, but I always just wonder why can't we have those beds available all the time?
You should become a member of the COC. No, that's the right question, and let me detour to an answer. I think that the Code Purple planning process is a kind of perfect microcosm of what the continuum of care is intended to be. So there's no one who governs Code Purple. There's no one is required, no shelters are required to participate. The city certainly can't obligate any shelter to participate. No one has that authority. And so the Code Purple planning process this year and last year looks like me through HIAC and through the Homeless Coalition, but me saying, hey y'all, who's interested in Code Purple and can we pull together a planning group? Then that planning group met a few times, but it's really contingent on shelters raising a hand to say, we want to add these extra beds. These are overflow beds for them beyond their regular operation. And then, so shelters coming to the table, transit coming to the table, the Homeless Coalition leadership coming to the table, community responders, community paramedics. I'm sure I'm missing some others, but really bringing that group of people together to really work through the operations of Code Purple, and then writing, my role in that is writing out the manual that then gets distributed, just trying to provide that infrastructure and support. And the city and county for the last 2 years, newly, this has not been historically true, have budgeted funds to support Code Purple specifically. City and county each budgeted $50,000. So $100,000 is really helpful in making that shelter capacity available.
But not enough to make those beds available 365 days a year, is what I'm hearing.
Yes, and I would say that those shelters would tell you that's not the entirety of their budget for a Code Purple operation. It's the city and county contributing heavily to that initiative. But really, this is a community initiative that was started in 2009 by shelters locally, has always been voluntary and participatory. I think what you're describing is really more like how do we expand shelter nightly in our community? And Code Purple beds also are the lowest barrier beds that we have, meaning you can show up in any condition as long as you can be there safely. You don't have to have, documentation, et cetera. You're able to come in because you need to come in because you don't have shelter and it's a very cold night. And so if we can add additional low barrier shelter beds in our community, what my hope, I said that we have this planning process that's just beginning on that. My hope, if we can really get the capacity right, is that it would really decrease the need for Code Purple if we just do have enough beds for people to be in every night. Thank you.
So we have a lot of nonprofits here in town, and resulting in the mishmash that you pointed out. But really, what it generally comes down to is lack of funding for these organizations. So is there a plan for a continuing source of funding for this continuum of care? Because I think that's going to be critical to making this successful.
I agree. So two-part answer. The continuum of care itself is a planning body, meaning it itself doesn't necessitate dedicated funds. Does that make sense? It's a planning body. It does need infrastructure. We need funds to staff our division to be able to support that. But as a planning body, the goal is that that body works together to solve exactly that problem. So rather than funders setting their own objectives or making their own decisions about funding for homeless and housing programs, can we consolidate that effort so that it can be most strategic and impactful? In the new charter for the restructure of the continuum of care, it provides for a funding committee, and the hope with that committee is that will be both money in and money out, meaning can that be a committee of folks with a lot of skill and expertise in that particular arena who can evaluate possible funding opportunities, who can go research funding opportunities, who can engage with funders and say, can you please support the continuum of care, and then really consolidate that decision-making so that it supports the strategies set by the board.
So the plan is for it to be kind of a clearinghouse for all these different funding bodies to funnel money into and then be distributed.
That's the hope, and again, it required, no one has any authority in this landscape, so it requires buy-in and participation from funders, from agencies, but yes, that's the hope. And the model for that, I think, is that city and county $100,000 for Code Purple. Those funding decisions were routed through HIAC, so that's a kind of prototype of what that can look like. And then that $2 million of federal funding that's available for homeless and housing programs, the decisions about the application that we submit to the federal government are also made by the Continuum of Care Governance
And
Board.
will that $2 million be an ongoing thing, or is that just a one-time?
It's annual.
It's annual.
It's annual, and it increases based on the performance of a community. So it's a competitive, we're eligible for up to about $2 million, but we're not guaranteed that. It's competitive across the country. And the higher we score on our application, which is based on the performance of our community, the more likely we are to get those dollars, and then that increases our renewal amount so it can snowball over time.
I just want to say thank you so much for all of this information. I learned so many new things and love the discussion we're having, both some points that Dane brought up and that Elise brought up. I think it's really, I'm going to add another contextual piece. Most communities rely on faith-based organizations to step up and do this all for free. And I know there's nonprofits that also support that work, but it makes me, when you're saying that, part of getting these funds is how invested is our community. It just seems really interesting to me. I've been a part of nonprofits and a lot of faith-based communities that provide these shelters, but can't sustain that because people can say, hey, I can do that, but I can only do it one weekend a month. Okay, well, when all of a sudden Code Purple happens, can you be available? And I think it's really interesting that, I imagine there's no incentives for those groups to do this, but a lot of communities, like you said, it starts from shelters, it starts from the community response, but that's not sustainable until the group comes together. And it makes me wonder, what other, and I'm sure this is what the continuum of care and the 4 work groups are working on, but how do we as a community continue to incentivize people in the community to step up and be a part of this? And how do we connect the people with the money, Dogwood, to say if we're going to spend X number of dollars on consultants, then we also are going to put up X number of dollars to put back into the community for these efforts that you're talking about. But anyway, just some thoughts about that and appreciation for what you're helping facilitate.
Thank you. Yeah, I think those are all the right questions. I think the continuum of care model, and the only way that we get this done is really kind of a stone soup model. You know, like what's the part that you can pitch in? What's the part that I can pitch in? We are, part of what I hope people really grab a hold of is that we are all stakeholders in this issue. Whether you want folks to not be homeless because of a kind of mission-driven approach, or whether you want folks to not be homeless because you're tired of someone being in front of your business, we want the same thing. We want the same thing. And so my hope is that folks really can grab a hold of that and come to that table as stakeholders, figure out how we can work together to make that happen. But yes, it does cost a lot of money to respond to homelessness, and the better we are at responding, the less money it costs over time if we can really use those dollars to a high impact.
Thank you, Emily. We appreciate that information. It's good information with it.
Thanks so much for having me. Let me say one last thing. Rick Freeman, who's the president of CAN, who I know was here with you last month, he's on the HIAC board, and also has been part of this governance work group and nominating a membership committee to transition to this new continuum of care. And that's been wonderful. It's been wonderful to have him bring that neighborhood perspective and kind of what I would call a non-practitioner perspective, you know, folks, just community folks who may not be service providers, but who, again, I would say are key stakeholders. And then great for him to be able to relay information back. So I just wanted to share that to say, I understand that neighborhoods are a key stakeholder in the effort to respond to homelessness, and also that you have such a great ombudsman who's already engaging in the work of the continuum of care on behalf of neighborhoods.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to just step away.
Missing middle housing study and text amendments under review. And Val, I'm not going to mess up your name, so I'm just going to say Val, Urban Planner 3, Planner and Urban Design Department.
Thanks, everybody. My name is Vadila Satvika, and I'll be talking about the Missing Middle Housing Study, which we just got the final report for, and in the context of that, this flag lot cottage proposal that we have from a community member and how it aligns or doesn't align with the study. You've all probably heard of missing middle housing. This slide is really useful. People sometimes say, why is it missing? Why is it middle? The idea is that for many years, about 70 years, we've had codes and financing that have gotten in the way of the type of housing that you see in the middle here. So primarily, we've built lots of single-family homes and large apartment complexes. So the middle housing has effectively gone missing from our housing stock. That's why we call it missing. And it's middle because it's middle in scale between the single-family and larger apartment complexes. But it's tends to fit in with neighborhoods. A lot of housing in Montford, for example, or a lot of old communities, the oldest subdivisions of most cities have a lot of middle housing. So it's actually an old form of most cities. This is a very quick presentation. I think it's 12 slides. I'll give an overview of the Missing Middle Housing Study. Then we'll look specifically at the flag lot cottage amendments and then have a little discussion. So the purpose of this study is really to look at policy that supports the creation of more housing supply and more housing variety. 2/3 of our housing currently disallows missing middle housing. Take that in. 66% of our residential districts disallow all this missing middle housing. And so the study is looking to see how we can provide more housing supply, more housing variety, that's the real kicker here, and greater affordability, because like we heard about for homelessness, we have a lot of unaffordable housing here in Asheville. These are some statistics from the report, and it's probably worse today. It says that average cost of housing has increased by 40%, basically in the last 10 years. The majority of residents are renters, a 10% increase. So there's a serious problem with affordability. Here are images of different types of middle housing, and I think the key components are that, one, they tend to be compatible with residential neighborhoods. Primarily, they're up to 1 to 2.5 stories in height, and they provide a lot more housing choice. So, there's a realization that a lot of people want to age in place as they get older. They don't want to take care of a single-family home and all the yard. These provide a lot of options for that. These provide options for young adults who have similar needs. We don't have a lot of these. The live work on the top left is an opportunity for people who want to have their business immediately below where they're working. When we think about missing middle, an important consideration to remember is that the middle housing tends to be more attainable in price. It tends to be a little bit more affordable because the units are smaller and it uses land more efficiently. But what we're finding through this study is that missing middle housing may only be attainable to middle and upper wage earners. But I think the report is clear that single-family homes are basically unaffordable for most people at this point. You can see how it works. If you have a large new home in Asheville, the image on the right, 3,200 square foot home, that's big, but the price today is over $1 million. But when you cut that in half, the price drops. You're left with a 1,600 square foot unit in a duplex, which is still larger than my house. So, we're not talking about cramming people into sardine cans here, but it gets more reasonable in price. And then at a fourplex, now the units are closer to 800 square feet. The price can drop because you're splitting those units over the same amount of land and the same foundation and so forth. So that's really, it's not rocket science, that's really why this type of housing tends to be more attainable. As part of this study, the consultants did what they call zoning tests. So they looked at our existing zoning in several different districts to find out what can currently be built, and then they compared it to what they think is a better use of land and a better recommendation for Asheville. So on the left, you see what's allowed in this RS8 single-family zoning district. You typically get one home and up to one ADU, an accessory dwelling unit. There's no size limit to the house except for we have a 40-foot height max in residential districts and basically, the side setbacks. So you can have a 4-story building in residential districts. What they recommend in this particular zoning district is to reduce the maximum height that's allowed so that the house, the structure is always contextual to the neighborhood, but to allow 2 units. Because a duplex is contextual to Asheville's history. In a lot of parts of the city, we have duplexes. And to allow an ADU. So potentially, in the same zoning district, we could have three units rather than 2, but they would be more appropriate to the size and scale of the neighborhood. And an important point here that I've highlighted put in bold is the orientation to the public realm. This next slide on the left shows a home that that was pointed out to us during a tour in Shiloh as a bad example of a new home that doesn't have the front of the house facing the street. And so we were urged by some residents in Shiloh to really focus on ensuring that buildings are oriented to the streets. And so these are examples actually of duplexes or homes with an ADU that face the street. And that's an important part that this study looks at. Part of the study looks at what's called a displacement risk assessment. It's basically an analysis that looks at populations that are more vulnerable to displacement. It looks at where the market is changing quickly or has already changed pretty quickly and pretty significantly. And that means where house prices have risen quickly or the rents have gone up a lot. And the built environment, which basically in their language means which is walkable, where there are sidewalks and it's easy to get around. I'm not going to get into this now except to say that there are a lot of maps and images in the study that highlight where there are more vulnerable populations, and we might want to be cautious or to think about potentially rolling out anti-displacement strategies at the same time as doing any kind of a change in zoning, because they naturally will change how housing pressures work. Last slide before we get to the text amendments. The summary of the findings, I'll read this. The study found that the existing regulatory context in Asheville encourages single-family housing significantly more than missing middle housing types. Simply allowing more single-family homes to be built will not move the needle enough to address this housing shortage or increase attainability. So this is a summary of the recommendations. They actually have a list of, I think it's about 50 total recommendations, but broadly speaking, they recommend to engage a community conversation to develop a missing middle housing implementation plan, to allow middle housing more broadly, focusing on the most appropriate areas first, to consider rolling out anti-displacement strategies at the same time, and to align other standards and requirements to permit missing middle housing by right, basically to streamline, to make it easier to build missing middle housing. Okay, so now we'll pivot to this recommendation, this proposal from a builder in Asheville to change our regulations for flag lots and cottages. So basically a flag lot is a non-standard subdivision of property with a narrow access point allowing a single-family home to be added behind a single-family home. And this is an example in Shiloh that I'm going to use to talk through these examples. So our current regulations require that that pole that brings you to the back of the property has to be 20 feet wide. It says that the flag pole area, here I don't shade it in yellow, cannot count as part of your lot area. So your minimum lot area, whoa, what just happened? Blackout.
It might have logged me up, but I can log back.
Okay.
Sorry, everyone.
It's because it's 7:30 and the meeting's supposed to be.
Is it? I have to go.
While she's doing that, can you tell me again what an ADU is? I know it's a detached
Yeah, it's an accessory dwelling unit. So in our code today, it states that you can have basically a separate structure for a home, either within your house, that would be considered an attached ADU, like a basement apartment or an attic apartment, or a detached unit, which would be like a granny flat in the backyard. So
Like a room above a garage, but.
exactly,
it's
a
little-
garage apartment is another word for it, granny flat, there's all kinds of names for it. And they typically are smaller. That's why they're called accessory dwelling units. They're smaller than the primary structure. And we currently have regulations that basically keep them at about 70% the size of the primary. They can't be larger than 70%. Yeah, our rules say that it can be 800 square feet, but not more than 70% of the primary dwelling unit. So if the primary is 1,000 square feet, you can only be 7% of that, which is 700 square feet.
Thank you.
To a maximum of 800.
Right. If you're detached, if you're attached, you can be 1,000 square feet. The missing middle report suggests that we should just be consistent and make all ADUs 1,000 square feet. We think that makes sense and it gives a little bit more flexibility. Okay, we're back. So I was talking through, oh yeah, so these are our current regulations for flag lots. So when you're calculating your minimum area for your flag lot, it can only be that yellow area. It can't also be the pole. We limit them to 1 per a subdivision of 8 because we don't think you should have flag poles everywhere because it's really kind of a disorganized form of development that's more complicated for fire access, for mail, everything. It's more challenging, and that it shall meet the minimum setbacks. So in this case, we wouldn't allow the flag lot because you can see where the home is. There isn't that minimum 20-foot. Not only is there not a 20-foot wide pole, but you need to have a 6-foot setback from the house, right? So in this case, it wouldn't work. Now, under the current proposal that a builder has suggested, initially he recommended that the flagpole width should only be 5 feet. He came back after a lot of negotiation, and we were like, we're not gonna, this is not gonna be viable. He suggested that that be moved up to 10 feet. So this is his current proposal, 10 feet. And suggesting a limited size of a structure to 1,400 square feet. Also reducing the side setback from the pole to the house to be 3 feet. And to include the flag pole area, so now you can see the pole is yellow, in the minimum area. It basically makes it easier for you to meet your minimum area. So in this case, his flag lot area would work. Now, the missing middle housing considerations, by the way, I have an asterisk here because this isn't typically something that missing middle housing consultants look at. This is outside of missing middle. Really, the middle housing is about providing homes closer to the street that are oriented to the street that have multiple units in one building. They did some of this analysis because we were concerned that some of these recommendations coming through at the same time might be in conflict, and so we wanted their opinion. So at any rate, they suggest that the flagpole minimum width should be no less than 12 feet wide. They suggest that we should limit the size of the structure to even less, to more like 1,200 square feet, to disincentivize people because if you're allowed to have an ADU in your backyard or a flag lot that's 1,200 square feet or 1,400 square feet, you're probably going to choose a bigger unit that's going to be more expensive. So smaller is better. And they suggest that we should consider having open space requirements so you don't have a home, another driveway, parking area, and concrete, and then another home. So it's basically home, concrete, home. And they're suggesting to adjust the parking requirements to only allow 1 space per unit. So in this case, still, the flagpole would not be permitted because they would still require the minimum 6-foot setback. So those are some thoughts for you all for flag lots.
When you say they, can you remind me who they is?
Our consultants are, it's a
On
firm.
middle missing housing.
Yes,
Okay.
they're consultants named Opticos.
So they're the ones that are saying, okay, here's the builder, here's the way it is, but here's what we're saying.
Right,
Okay.
exactly.
Which
So
does follow.
they're basically suggesting that we could reduce our flagpole dimension but they would suggest we limit the house size even more. However, after I get through the rest of this, I think I'll make it clear that their overall suggestion is that we are building too much single-family home. Single-family homes are already the majority of our building stock, and that should not be the direction that we're going if we're looking for more attainable housing. We need more housing variety, more housing options, so this shouldn't be high on our list. Not to mention that this isn't a maybe a comprehensive way to address housing, because it's only looking at those lots that have a little bit extra room. Okay, so now looking at cottage developments. I'll first read this description. It's a series of small detached buildings on a lot arranged to define a shared court that's typically perpendicular to the street, and it emphasizes community. So I put both the current proposal in blue here and the recommendations from the consultants in black to put it all in one slide. You can see the two images on the right are what the intention of a cottage development is. It's houses sharing common open space, and the intention is community. So they recommend the absolute minimum number of cottages should be 3. And this proposal from the developer is to have 2 cottages. And you can see what the proposal for 2 cottages would be on the lower image here. It's basically just 2 homes on a lot. We could argue that that's not a cottage development. This is really a request for how to get more housing in RS8. And if we do that, we should just think about how we're changing zoning regulations potentially for RS8. They suggest that we should allow ADUs and duplexes in cottage developments. They're suggesting to reduce the maximum height to 2 stories from 28 feet, because 28 feet can actually be 3 stories, and that wouldn't be contextual. So that's it. There's a lot in the missing middle housing study that I didn't cover because it is 155 pages. It's now available on this website here, asheville.nc.gov/missing-middle. And I'll open up for questions.
I have more than one, but the first question is, how can you separate the missing middle housing from the flag lots? Because if you'll go back to where you showed the flag lot in Shiloh, go back.
Just the image?
It was a picture of it.
Oh, I didn't have any pictures of flag lots, I don't think.
Well, it's almost like a flag. Keep going. Right there. I don't know what that is, but that's my church that's right there on the corner.
Okay.
And if you'll see where my church is on the left, and that house, this funny looking color, it's about this much space between my church and that house. And the closest fire hydrant is way on the other side of the street, going down the street, it's closest to us. And if there's a fire, they can't even come up in between that area. So I think that he has it was a house on it, then he did a garage apartment, and then he did that. And I'm just, what would that be considered if it's just showing that's not facing the street? Is that what it is?
Well, I was just highlighting here that it's not facing the street.
Okay.
So we can change the regulations to require buildings to face the street. And because we don't have a regulation, people do that. I have a house in my neighborhood that's really poorly oriented. It looks horrible, and it's going to be like that forever.
And so I was saying that that's one of the concerns of the people in Shiloh. And I know that I think people would be be more inviting with these type of houses. Maybe the cottages, if it was meant that it was more space and where they were situated. Because when you start coming into communities and you put that many cottages in one space, we don't have the infrastructure. The streets are not wide, and the congestion with traffic would even get more. So the consideration of how many you would put and how close they would be together would be a concern for me.
Well, they're suggesting changing our regulations to set the cottage maximum footprint to be smaller so that you could potentially have 6 cottages that are maybe 800 square feet, but you have to have a lot that's big enough. So it's hard to talk about this without looking at an actual site, but the intention isn't just to pack them together, but there should be shared open space and enough room for parking and all of that.
And I think the problem with communities, not just mine, but other communities, is that they were not given any communication or information on how this was going to be done before it was brought before, to try to bring it before the city council for approval. And that goes all the way from how planning and zoning has not gone to the communities, which they used to do and talk about, this is what is proposed. And it would, planning and zoning would just say, okay, and it would go to the city, and it left out the community knowing anything. And then that means that we have to come back and fight for ourselves. And so
Yeah.
that's what we've had to do.
So when staff begins a zoning text amendment, we normally do that. We go around. This was, and this is sort of a learning opportunity for us because we have a regulation that allows the public to request a zoning amendment, but there isn't a clear formula for what their engagement requirements are. And in fact, you know, the applicant clearly stated that he was trying to make some quick amendments, you know, almost happening under the radar to make some changes quickly because, and there are lots of good points there. We're in a housing crisis. We need to act. We need to be responsive. But the double edge of that sword is that if you act without community input, you're risking some changes without enough input.
And I think that's what it is, because the communication and the misunderstanding of what you're gonna do and how you're gonna do it. And planning is only putting houses so close together. I think that's something too. And most people in communities, they don't, you know, when you talk about, we have so many people that wanna move into Asheville, you know, and they call me and they wanna buy my house too. And you wonder, you say to yourself, well, what about us? You're thinking about a projection of how many people want to move to Asheville. And after I saw that the Christmas movie from the Biltmore, I think more people are going to want to come to Asheville and move, because I saw that movie. But how does that impact the people that already live here? And you're infringing on them by changing codes for planning and zoning, and meaning that if their next door neighbor sells their home and their property, then that means those developers are coming right over on the edge of their property. And it's like a privacy thing. It's just like they feel left out because there's no communication.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll just to mention one point here, the study is highlighting the importance of allowing some more growth, but doing it in a way that is within individual buildings, rather than, I think what I've heard a lot from Shiloh is this hodgepodge placement of buildings on lots that actually take up more land and don't leave open space, like in backyards and things. So if you can fit 2 units like this in a home that's actually shorter and closer to the street, you can actually potentially retain more land for trees, open space, playing, like you were saying, you know, kids need places to play, whether it's a duplex or a fourplex. It's probably better, what the study is saying, to have a fourplex than to have 4 individual homes coming into your neighborhood, because they will be more attainable in price. Now, I know some people, you know, want to I think the recommendation is saying, shall we allow that to happen? Not should we mandate it, but currently 2/3 of our zoning districts disallow anything but single family.
Pet peeve I have that goes right along with the house not facing the street is houses where the whole front of the house is the garage, and then the house is actually behind the garage. I think that is a very unfriendly look for a neighborhood.
I completely agree, and the study addresses that by suggesting that we think more critically about the placement of the garages. I just drove by a neighborhood that did this really well, where all the, and it subdued the driveway a little bit. And we have the authority to do that. So
If I'm understanding correctly, one of the reasons that you included that slide was sort of what not to do in that facing the side, in terms of what this.
yeah.
Yeah, what this group was doing. And I really appreciated that at the city council meeting, the city staff saying, you know, we realize, and the way you were describing it, we normally do engage people. This was sort of a loophole, a back door that caught everybody off guard. And I really appreciated the staff saying, we have some regrets about that, and that you additionally saying that's a learning curve. And I think that is an indication that a lot of the neighborhood input is helping too. It's everyone sort of just flinging things around.
I know, I'm
Getting all passionate
Yeah.
about it, but that it is working, that when something like this comes up, it really did activate a lot of people to say, wait a minute, this is different. We were caught off guard, and this is, so I appreciate the fact that you're saying this is, facing the street and creating community versus what you're talking about, that there was very little space. It didn't even sound like it quite met the minimum requirements, but the recommendations from this group if you'll go a couple of slides forward, sort of what that person was saying versus, or you had one in black and one in blue. Can you go?
Oh, for
Yeah.
for
that
cottages?
They were saying do 2, and they're saying, no, we need at least 3. They're actually moving towards the community and away from that proposal is what it.
Right, and I think another thing too, zoning can be very complicated, and most people's eyes glaze over because they don't understand. This recommendation for a zoning change really would only affect the RS8 zoning district. So you have to ask, why would we change a cottage development ordinance that is meant to support community by reducing the number of cottages to only 2 to benefit one zoning district? It's, it really is to make it easier to build another single-family house in RS8. That's really the reason to do that. And I think the study would suggest that instead we consider allowing duplexes in some of these zoning districts, so that when a lot opens up, you don't get 2 houses, you get 1, and most people won't know that it's even a duplex. But it will house more people. So that will tend to be more attainable in price.
Well, that seems like a good change because, 2 houses on one lot is not missing middle by any stretch. It's just 2 houses on one lot.
That's right, right.
And let me just say, I know that we're about to get out of time, but let me just say this. I think there's another disconnect because I'll just say in reference to Shiloh, because this is where I live. When developers come in and they want to do this, the way they communicate with us is not nice. They don't, they treat us unfairly when they talk to us about what they want to do. And since we are established, we have a 2025 plan. So this is what we're looking at. When you're coming to us telling us this is what you're gonna do, and you talk to us as if we, I don't know, as if you're saying that you have no voice, and this is what we're gonna do. And then when they realize that we do have connections and we will take it to the city, then they come back and then they'll say, well, they apologize. But some things you just can't apologize for. So maybe these developers that come in, especially into these legacy neighborhoods, they feel like we don't care, but we do care. And that's not just my neighborhood, but that's Burton Street has lost a lot. East End has lost a lot. A lot of different pieces have been coming, but just the disrespect of the developers that come in to want to talk to us is really trying to belittle us, and that's how we feel when they come to talk to us, and they talk to us and we ask them questions, then they act like they get offended by it because they say we have no right to ask them. Yeah. And that's just
Yeah.
FYI on how we feel about that, and that might be why the communication gets lost as it goes further, because we've already had one step that they talk to us a certain way, and now we've got one developer, and we know are waiting on you all to do this, because they want to come into our neighborhood, and they want to do the mixed usage, and they want to come on a strip that the traffic flow is gonna be off of Sweeten Creek, and he's determined this is what he's gonna do. He wants to do duplexes and homes, and he's got a lot of property. And then what he said to us when we met with him, across from where he wants to build is a cemetery. And he told us, this is what he told us in a meeting. He said, well, if we build over there, if you have a funeral after 5 o'clock, you can use our space. But now, we don't have funerals in the cemetery. That's number one. But that was like, what are you trying to say to us by giving us a little bit of nothing to make us feel better? So it didn't work. And I'm just giving that as an example on how maybe there need to be some kind of a communication and talking more with developers before they come into our space and want to build and to do things. Because we are important. We are generational. A lot of these communities are generational homeowners. And we want to stay where we are, but we want to be respected just like everybody else.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What other neighborhoods have RSA housing zoning?
Lots of neighborhoods.
Okay. 'Cause, like, in October, the developer came in and he was talking about Shiloh, and there's examples of you talking about Shiloh, but nobody's saying, let's go into Grove Park and build cottage housing. Wouldn't it be a better use of space to take a much larger lot and build more houses on there versus a condensed lot?
Maybe. I think it's a little bit more complicated in that at least the study's intention is meeting different factors. And I'll just summarize them in that the best places will have less vulnerable populations, less drastic recent changes, and be walkable. So you can think of a lot of areas closer to the downtown, but even then, some of those neighborhoods have a lot of vulnerability. So really, in having more housing units on less land, you want to be more walkable, because it's likely that people won't own as many cars, or no cars in some cases. And that's not Grove Park, because Grove Park isn't as walkable as some areas.
As 1 mile from downtown.
Well, still, compared to, closer in, so I'm not saying it wouldn't work, but in some cases, yes, and we can look at those. A lot of this presentation was prepared for a meeting in Shiloh, so it's kind of regurgitating some of the information. But yes, we can, I'd say as a starting point, look at the study and kind of read through the methodology and the thinking and which neighborhoods are on the sort of the green, like go-ahead light, the green light for what the consultants think is missing middle ready.
Land also, that's the big restrictor, big problem right now is available land.
Sure, but these are, the idea is that these will lead to comprehensive zoning changes that will affect lots of areas, and because it's hard to really understand what's available land. Sometimes somebody has an extra lot, sometimes they can split their lot, their house is very old, they may be thinking of tearing it down, so that's more difficult to understand.
What would be a good definition of like a vulnerable population? Because when more housing gets pushed into like the Shiloh community, that's a predominantly black neighborhood, and they are less than 10% of Asheville's population. So I would consider that to be a vulnerable community.
Yes, and it is. In the map, it's a vulnerable, or it's designated as, in the colors, more vulnerable, more sensitive. And the definition has to do with housing tenure, whether you own or rent, educational attainment, income, and race, ethnicity.
I I know we're getting to the end of our time, but we don't get the opportunity to ask
Yeah.
questions like this all the time. When you talk about a more attainable price, but still only to middle and upper wage earners, and you showed that slide that showed, you know, a single-family home is going to be $1.1 million, and if you divide that in half, you know, obviously your price per unit decreases. But isn't there still a reality that, like, one person's going to buy that fourplex over there and then rent out the 4 to other people? Like, it's
Maybe.
not necessarily that one family's going to purchase each unit.
No, those could be sale or rental units. So, yeah, we have no ability in setting up requirements for ownership. We can't
Right,
control that.
right.
But just like the single-family house can be a rental or for sale, same with the fourplex.
Right, at least you get more units on the same area, hopefully more supply, and makes lower prices as far as I
Right.
know, economics.
And whether you're buying or renting, the price will be lower.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to, like, you know, mention that in reality, there's still a likelihood that someone might own all 4 of those and rent them out.
Definitely. No, there's been a lot of investment, investing in residential property that's become a problem because huge funds are coming in and buying up land.
Yeah. As far as, you know, you mentioned we want to have, or part of the criteria is that they need to be in like walkable neighborhoods, which is why we're talking about RMA more, and like location to more transit. If we build out our sidewalk network and our transit network, there are more areas that might qualify for this type of housing infrastructure.
Yeah, for sure. And the report addresses that. There are the ideal locations which are already walkable, and then those locations that are potentially walkable that through transformation can be more walkable and better for middle housing. So you can think of this as the most appropriate locations are walkable. That doesn't mean that we don't want middle housing in places that are primarily auto-oriented. It's just that they're not going to reap the benefits as much as walkable neighborhoods.
Okay. And then you mentioned when you were talking about the displacement risk assessment that part of that is looking at gentrification, and you also mentioned something that, like, maybe at the same time we can roll out mitigating strategies.
Right.
Strategies, like what are strategies to mitigate gentrification?
So we could spend a whole meeting just on this, but Chapter 5 in this study looks at the displacement risk assessment, and then they have a list of strategies they call anti-displacement strategies. And there are some that are short-term and others that are long-term. So a short-term strategy might be figuring out how to give somebody eviction assistance, or how to understand, you know, really tenuous situation when they're having to leave their home to find a new place. A long-term strategy might just be more housing supply. How can you create more housing supply? So I don't remember how long the list is, but they have a list of anti-displacement strategies, and that will be a list for us to have a community conversation about, to think about, you know, which ones are worth investigating and possibly rolling out or pursuing further.
Mm-hmm. And is there any possibility that neighborhoods like Shiloh, other like really vulnerable neighborhoods that have already been really impacted by gentrification, is there any possibility that they might be like carved out of the area that missing middle housing is allowed in?
Well, this is an interesting, the answer is yes. So you know, we can decide collectively how to roll out any kind of zoning change. One thing to keep in mind is that the report is stating that single-family zoning is less affordable. So if you don't allow for more housing options, you're basically making more pressure there. And so prices will likely be more unattainable. So missing middle housing is actually a strategy, long-term strategy for gentrification. So if a community chooses to want to continue to be a single-family community, that's really choosing a housing strategy that is less attainable. So we can collectively choose to respect that, but it's choosing a housing option that may be not in the best financial interest of that community. And so then the question is, how do we go through that discussion with that community? Who makes that decision?
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Well, you mentioned Montford as an example, and I think it's great because, you walk around Montford, you've got the fourplexes and the duplexes mixed in with a smattering of commercial businesses and obviously, a lot of single-family homes. And it's close to downtown, it's very walkable, it's got sidewalks. I mean, we lived in Montford when we first came here, and you could easily walk downtown. I mean, you really didn't need a car. So I think, if we can target neighborhoods like that, to start and get this ball rolling, I think that would make it much more acceptable.
When my wife and I were building a house and we had a baby, we lived in a 300 square foot apartment in a 20-unit building behind Harris Teeter and Trader Joe's, and it was actually lovely. We could walk everywhere. It was really a nice part of life. So I think it's important to know that in life there are these different phases where we go through, and so housing variety serves us at different times of life, and that's why it's good that or cities that have a lot of variety actually have better housing options and more attainability. I'll leave with just a schedule. We're planning to go and present to PED, the Planning and Economic Development Subcommittee of Council, in 2 weeks, I think. Yeah, not next week, but the week after. So we'll be talking about this, so tune into that if you're interested. We're planning, it's not on the council calendar yet, but to go to council's first meeting of the new year on January 9th to talk just about missing middle so that we can have a space before the January 23rd meeting with more of the other text amendments that are potentially, at odds, so that we have just some space to talk about that, just the missing middle on its own. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
The time is getting late. Late. Can we do do you have a quick report, Lisa? Can we wait till January?
I mean, the big one is that the county, so the city put $300,000 towards a joint city-county transit plan. The county did not match that $300,000, so the city's having to pivot with how they want to spend that money. And so instead of doing a city-county master plan, they are going to do like a tweaking of the 2018 transit master plan. It's not on implementing the 2018 transit master plan is not on schedule, and costs have significantly changed since that time. So I think part of the thing that they want to do is to set a more realistic rollout of the recommendations.
And I'm kind of like with this appointment of the non-voting NAC member. Elizabeth, what were we gonna do with?
What we discussed was, since I am now vice chair, that we already have somebody from NAC as an MMTC appointment, and we talked about the possibility of then just being that liaison person and my
Okay, we're not having.
dropping off of
Okay.
that. And I didn't know if there needed to be an official decision, a recommendation, because I'm not appointed
Right.
by the city council, and you're already on that.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so I don't think we have to vote on it.
My only response to that would be that I like having more like neighborhood input on MMTC. And I know Dane has applied, and not Dane, I'm sorry, Jake has applied but is not currently an MMTC like voting member. So if he wanted to step into the non-voting liaison role, I think that would be cool.
Seems pretty
I would nominate Jake to be our non-voting NAC liaison.
I would be interested.
Okay, so you nominated, can somebody give
I'll
a second?
second that.
Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No, so we ready to go. Any more comments? Don't forget about the neighborhood association meetings, if you can make any of them. And you see the agenda, we're gonna try to get Cam back. And our next meeting is January the 22nd at 6:30.
Any quick updates, Kim?
I'll be real fast. It's really great presentation scheduled today. Thank you for getting that agenda. I learned stuff while I was here today, of course. There was something missing from Emily's excellent presentation, and it's been so helpful to me. At the top of the City of Asheville's website, you'll see Code Purple is in effect. It includes tonight. When you click on that, you can learn more. It takes you to the Code Purple website. So if you encounter somebody who's wondering, is Code Purple called, can I get into shelter after hours? This has that information. It includes information about the shelters, the hours, who needs to go to which location, including information for safe shelter, which includes intact families. So an example I ran into is a family that was close to the River Arts District. They choose not to go into shelter with their young child because they would be separated. So safe shelter is an option, but it requires a referral. All that information is here. It has a really helpful Code Purple procedure manual that is also on the city's website that includes a number you can call that has an automated message that tells you whether or not Code Purple is called. A lot of times it's hard to find information, and our community has worked really hard to get it all in one place. So I want to make sure that you knew about that. And since it's the last meeting of the year, I just wanted to say thank you for being our Neighborhood Advisory Committee. It is an absolute honor to be your liaison.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you, Kim.
Anything else? Meeting adjourned. You
like that too much, don't you?
Yeah, I kind of do, don't I?
Really good, though. And I'm sorry, I do know your guys' names. I do.